The box labeled fragile was lying to me. Nothing inside was breakable. At least not in the way I felt when I stepped into that new apartment for the first time. After the breakup, I told myself a change of address would mean a change of heart. The walls were pale gray, the windows tall and tired, and the floor creaked in protest at every step, but it smelled like new paint and possibility. Mark was already there, sitting cross-legged on the floor, assembling a coffee table with a screwdriver and the kind of concentration that made him look like he was defusing a bomb. "You must be Evan," he said, glancing up with an easy smile. "Don't worry, I only broke 2 screws." He was older than I expected. Maybe late 20s, maybe 30. Broad shoulders under a faded t-shirt, short hair that didn't seem to care which direction it went. He had a small scar above his eyebrow, the kind that tells a story you want to ask about but shouldn't. I nodded, suddenly aware of how clumsy I must look holding a half-torn cardboard box. "Yeah, that's me. You must be the miracle worker who found this place." He chuckled, the sound low, relaxed. Miracle's a strong word. I just knew the landlord. The way he said it made it sound like he knew everyone. Bartenders, shop owners, dogs that waited outside stores. Some people have that gravity, the kind that pulls a room into orbit around them. I was already drifting. We shook hands. His palm was warm, rougher than mine. I felt it longer than I should have, then released it, pretending to fix my sleeve. The first few days passed like careful choreography, 2 strangers learning the rhythm of shared space. I unpacked during the day, went to my graduate classes in the evening, and tried to keep to myself. Mark worked construction management, meaning he was out early and home late, usually humming or whistling when he came in. He was loud in all the ways that made silence feel less lonely. Cabinets opened, pans clattered, water ran. Sometimes he sang in the shower, fragments of songs I didn't know, but his voice carried through the walls, easy and unguarded. The first morning, I walked into the kitchen half awake and stopped short. He stood shirtless by the counter, flipping eggs in a pan, steam curling around his shoulders. "Oh, hey, morning," he said casually, as if half-naked introductions were normal. "Morning," I muttered, pretending to search for coffee filters I already saw. He noticed my hesitation and grinned. "Sorry, didn't mean to start your day with a National Geographic exhibit." I laughed, grateful for humor to hide behind. "I'll survive." But the image stayed, the sunlight on his skin, the faint scar tracing down his ribs. I told myself not to notice. I noticed anyway. Small domestic accidents became our language. When my shelf refused to stand straight, Mark crouched beside me, hands steadying the wood as I fumbled with a screwdriver. Our knees brushed. "You're doing it backward," he said, smiling. Not judging, just observing. "Then you do it." I would, but then you'd never learn. Besides, this is more fun to watch. His voice carried a warmth that wasn't teasing. Not really. More like quiet admiration he didn't know how to name. That night he cooked spaghetti and said, "We don't need to be strangers, right? Roommates should at least share a meal before plotting each other's murders." We ate on mismatched plates, knees touching under the small table. He told me stories from his job, the heat on construction sites, the smell of asphalt after rain, the weird camaraderie of men who pretend they don't care but do. I listened, pretending it was just dinner. Inside, something unclenched. Weeks passed. The apartment began to feel like a heartbeat we shared, separate but syncopated. He'd ask how my classes were going. I'd ask if he was eating anything green this week. He'd steal my laundry detergent. I'd borrow his phone charger. We became familiar in the way that makes you forget what life was like before someone's presence filled the air. Still, I overanalyzed everything. The way he leaned close when showing me something on his phone. The way he said my name softer each time. The way he'd stand at the window, shirtless again, talking about nothing at all while I pretended to read. Sometimes I'd catch his eyes lingering on me too long. Or maybe I imagined it. Maybe I wanted to imagine it. At night, I'd replay small gestures like film reels. A hand brushing past mine while reaching for the remote. A shared laugh that lasted too long. The quiet after. One Friday evening, the rain decided to audition for disaster film sound effects. The power flickered once, twice, then surrendered. "Well," Mark said from the couch, shaking the flashlight on his phone. "Guess movie night just got atmospheric." He lit a candle and set it on the coffee table. The flame painted the room gold, shadows stretching like secrets on the wall. We sat side by side, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of detergent and him. The movie played faintly on his laptop, faces glowing in the dim light. At some point, my shoulder brushed his. He didn't move. Neither did I. The silence between us grew thick. Not uncomfortable, just aware. Every breath, every shift of fabric felt magnified. I told myself it was nothing, that he was straight, kind, and probably oblivious, that I was reading into comfort what I wanted to be connection. Still, when he leaned slightly closer, our arms pressed together. My pulse stuttered. He didn't flinch. When the credits rolled, we didn't speak for a moment. Just the sound of rain against glass. "That was not terrible," he said finally, voice quiet. "Yeah," I replied, staring at the candle's last flicker. He turned to me, face half in shadow. "You're different from what I expected." "How so?" "Quieter, calmer, but funny when you forget to be scared." I smiled, unsure what that meant but unwilling to break the spell. "Guess I'm still adjusting." He nodded slowly, eyes warm. "Take your time. No rush here." We sat like that, two people pretending we weren't thinking the same thing. Eventually, he stretched, stood, and ruffled my hair like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Don't stay up too late, grad boy." When he disappeared down the hall, I exhaled the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. In my room, the silence felt louder than the rain. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, tracing back every moment. The warmth of the couch, the weight of his arm against mine, the way his voice dipped when he said my name. Maybe it was just friendship. Maybe it was nothing. But in the dark, with thunder fading and the scent of candle wax lingering, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, small, fragile, but undeniable. He said we didn't need to be strangers, and somehow that promise already felt like danger. If the first weeks were about politeness, the next were about patterns. Mark and I slipped into a rhythm that felt dangerously easy. He'd come home late, boots loud in the hallway, smell faintly of rain and sawdust. I'd be on the couch surrounded by notes and empty coffee mugs. Without fail, he'd say, "You working or summoning demons again?" And I'd mutter something about deadlines while hiding a smile. He started bringing takeout on Fridays. Greasy noodles, pizza, curry that burned twice, and we'd eat cross-legged on the floor, laughing about whatever went wrong that week. Somewhere between spilled soy sauce and shared playlists, the apartment began to feel less like a rental and more like the inside of a secret. He told me about his ex-girlfriend one night, half drunk on cheap beer, staring at the ceiling fan like it owed him answers. 3 years, he said. Thought we were headed somewhere. Then she said I was too calm for her. Can you believe that? I tried to laugh. Yeah, calm. Terrible trait. He rolled the bottle between his palms. Guess I just don't like shouting. When I'm mad, I fix things. Or break furniture. Whichever's closer. He looked at me then, half smile, half confession. I felt the air stretch. You ever been in love, Evan? Once, I said. Didn't end with furniture, though. Just silence. He nodded, quiet for a long time. Silence hurts worse. I didn't say it, but I thought about how his voice had become the opposite of silence for me, loud, living everywhere. Our friendship became the kind that blurred hours. Midnight would sneak in and we'd still be talking. About music, family, dreams we didn't chase. Sometimes he'd fall asleep mid-sentence on the couch, and I'd drape the blanket over him like something sacred. I learned his habits, how he always scratched the back of his neck when embarrassed, how he hummed when cooking, how he used man like punctuation. Man, this sauce is good. Man, you worry too much. But sometimes that man came out softer, like it didn't quite mean buddy anymore. Then came the night he stumbled in past midnight, voice rough with laughter. Hey, Ev, he slurred, leaning on the doorframe. Forgot my keys. You're a legend. He smelled of whiskey and rain. His hair was damp, cheeks flushed. I helped him to his room, But halfway down the hall he mumbled, "Wait, I'll just lie down here a sec," and dropped onto my bed instead. Mark, that's... He was already half asleep, boots still on. I pulled them off, muttering curses, but when I turned to leave, he shifted, curling instinctively toward the warmth I left behind. For a second, I froze. His hand brushed my sleeve, light, unconscious. His breath slowed, deepened. The sound filled the room. I sat on the edge of the mattress, meaning to move him, but the closeness made the idea impossible. My pulse was in my throat. The faint heat of his skin soaked through the air. He murmured something, my name maybe, and I swear it felt like gravity. Nothing happened. It wasn't that kind of moment, but it was the kind that rearranges something invisible inside you. I lay awake in the armchair that night, pretending to read, listening to him breathe. Morning arrived bright and merciless. Mark appeared in the kitchen rubbing his eyes, hair erect. Did I crash somewhere stupid? On my bed, I said. He blinked. Damn. Sorry, man. Must have been dead tired. All good. I tried for a shrug. He poured coffee, unbothered. I watched him move around the kitchen like the night hadn't existed at all. Maybe for him it hadn't, but I couldn't stop remembering the weight beside me, the accidental intimacy of it. Guilt tangled with want until I couldn't tell them apart. That day, when he brushed my shoulder reaching for a mug, I felt it like a current. Domestic life kept offering new ways to torture me. He'd lean over my notebook and say, "You write like a doctor, illegible and probably dangerous." Or he'd taste something I cooked and groan appreciatively. Man, if I could cook like this, I'd marry myself. Maybe you should, I joked. He looked at me for a beat too long before grinning. Nah, too much commitment. Little things, the laughter, the nicknames, the way he always sat too close. They piled up like evidence for a crime neither of us would admit to committing. Rain arrived again one Friday, turning the windows into watercolor. The city blurred, and so did my boundaries. The lights flickered once, twice, and died. Mark whistled softly. You and power outages, huh? Think we're cursed. He found candles, set them between us on the table, and opened a bottle of wine I didn't know we owned. To survival, he said, raising his glass. To faulty wiring, I added. We laughed, but the sound faded into something softer. The candlelight painted everything gold. His face, his hands, the curve of his smile. We talked about nonsense at first. Favorite cities, the worst jobs we ever had. Then about loneliness. Sometimes, he said quietly, I think I work too much, so I don't have to think about stuff. What kind of stuff? He shrugged. How quiet it gets when I'm home. I swallowed. Yeah, I know that quiet. He met my eyes then. The look lingered too long to be casual. The wine was half gone. The room felt smaller, warmer. My pulse counted the space between us. I wanted to move, to break the spell, but he leaned back in his chair, watching me with that unreadable calm. You ever feel like you're waiting for something, and you don't even know what? He asked. All the time, I said. And when it finally shows up, you're terrified to touch it. The air held its breath. His fingers traced the rim of his glass. Slow, deliberate. For a moment, I thought he'd reach across the table. Instead, he smiled faintly and looked away. We're getting way too deep for a blackout, he murmured. Maybe that's when people finally talk, I replied. He didn't answer, just stared at the candle until it guttered low. Later, when we cleaned up, our hands brushed over the same plate. Neither of us moved first. The silence felt alive, not awkward, just aware. I could feel the warmth of him, close enough to touch, close enough to ruin everything. He finally stepped back, clearing his throat. Night, man. Night, I whispered. When he walked down the hall, the air he left behind still felt full. I lay in bed, replaying the evening, the laughter, the pauses that weren't really pauses, the almost words caught between us. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe it was loneliness dressed as courage. But I couldn't stop thinking about how his voice softened when he said my name. Outside, thunder rolled far away. Inside, the candle's ghost flickered against the walls. And somewhere between those two silences, his and mine, I realized the truth. The quiet between us had started talking. It said all the things we were too afraid to speak. By January, the apartment had learned how to be cold. The old radiator gave up first. A cough, a clank, then silence. I tried to call the landlord twice, left 2 voicemails, and eventually gave up too. The air inside felt like glass. Every breath fogged against it. Mark shrugged when I told him, "We'll manage a few days. You've survived grad school. You can survive winter." He said it with a grin, but he started wearing 2 hoodies indoors and boiling water just to let the steam warm the kitchen. We both learned the art of moving only when necessary. That night, he fell asleep early, or so I thought. I could hear the low murmur of a podcast through his door. I stayed up, writing, hands stiff with cold, blanket draped over my lap like a poor apology. Around midnight, my laptop battery gave out, and so did I. The couch wasn't comfortable, but it was familiar. I tucked myself under 2 layers and pulled the edges to my chin. The apartment's noises were sharp in the stillness. The wind rattling the window frame, pipes groaning somewhere deep. Sleep came in fragments. Evan. His voice was a low whisper in the dark. I blinked awake, disoriented. He stood at the end of the couch, hair messy, t-shirt clinging to his chest. "You're gonna freeze out here," he said, rubbing his eyes. "Come on." "I'm fine," I mumbled, teeth betraying me with a small chatter. He frowned. "You're not. The bed's big enough. Just come to my room. We can share the blanket." He said it half asleep, half kind, the way you offer help before you think too much about it. Every instinct told me to refuse. Every shiver said otherwise. "All right," I whispered. His room smelled faintly of cedar and detergent. Familiar, comforting, terrifying. He pulled the blanket back and slid in first, leaving a clear space beside him. "See? Plenty of room," he said softly, already turning onto his side. I hesitated in the doorway like a trespasser. Then, quietly, I lay down, careful not to let our bodies touch, though the warmth radiating from him was impossible to ignore. The ceiling creaked with wind. Somewhere outside, snow tapped gently against glass. Minutes stretched. Neither of us spoke. Then he shifted, just slightly, the mattress dipping under his weight until our shoulders brushed. A small contact, accidental maybe, but the shock of it traveled straight through me. I told myself not to read into it, that he was asleep, that warmth makes people reach without meaning to. But the longer I lay there, the more deliberate it felt. The way his breathing synced with mine, the subtle exhale that brushed my neck. Time lost its edges. Every second existed in high definition. The rustle of sheets, the whisper of his breath, the faint sound of his heartbeat. I could smell the trace of his shampoo, clean and human and unbearably close. Then came the smallest shift, his arm sliding across the space between us, settling lightly around my waist. Not pulling, not possessive, just there. I froze. He sighed softly, his forehead grazing the back of my neck. Whether he was dreaming or not, I couldn't tell, but his touch was steady, real, and the kind of warmth that didn't feel like accident anymore. My mind screamed that I should move. My body stayed perfectly still. Hours might have passed, or maybe only minutes. I watched the faint blue of dawn creep through the blinds. Every heartbeat felt too loud in the silence. I wanted to turn toward him, to see if his eyes were closed, to know if he was awake. But the risk was unbearable. One glance could shatter the fragile peace of the moment. So I stayed. And in that stillness, guilt tangled with something sweeter. It wasn't about wanting to cross a line. It was about wanting to belong to that quiet, that closeness, even if only for a night. I told myself, don't ruin this. Just remember it. If I could have captured that warmth, I would have kept it hidden in my chest forever. A small, stolen piece of something that wasn't supposed to be mine. When morning finally arrived, light spilled across the room like truth. Mark stirred first, blinking at the sunlight, then at me. His arm was still around my waist. For one dizzy second, he didn't move. Then he cleared his throat and rolled away, sitting up quickly. "Damn heater," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "You okay?" Didn't mean to steal the blanket. Yeah, I said. My voice sounded small. All good. He smiled, but his eyes didn't quite meet mine. Guess we survived the Arctic. I nodded, pulling the blanket tighter around myself, even as he stood and stretched. The morning light carved him in half, bright shoulders, shadowed face. Coffee? He asked, already halfway to the kitchen. Sure, I said. He left the door open, as if the night behind us needed proof that nothing unusual had happened. The smell of coffee drifted in. I sat on the bed for a while, tracing the creases on the sheet where his body had been. It felt ridiculous, teenage even, but I couldn't help it. Every memory from last night blurred at the edges. The sound of his voice, the weight of his arm, the breath against my skin. I wanted to believe it had meant something. But when I joined him in the kitchen, he was humming again, acting like the world hadn't shifted an inch. Morning, man, he said, handing me a mug. Cold still winning? Think I'm catching up, I replied. He grinned. That's the spirit. Our fingers brushed when he passed the sugar. It was an accident. Or maybe it wasn't. I couldn't tell anymore. We spent the rest of the day pretending. Pretending that warmth was just warmth. That sleep had no stories. He worked on his laptop. I wrote, my words useless. Every now and then, I'd catch him looking at me like he wanted to say something, then deciding not to. By evening, the heater finally sputtered back to life. The apartment filled with clunky, comforting noise. Mark exhaled. Finally, I was starting to think we'd have to burn your thesis for warmth. I laughed. It's worth more as kindling anyway. He smiled, that same gentle curve I'd seen in the dark, and for a moment everything felt almost normal. Almost. That night, I wrote in my notebook, something I hadn't done since moving in. The words came out uneven, like thoughts that didn't want to be seen. He said we could share the blanket. He didn't say what that meant. I think he was asleep. I think I wasn't. If I could keep that warmth somewhere safe, I would, not as proof, not as hope, just as a reminder that even in the coldest nights, something reached for me. I closed the notebook and turned off the light. The heater hummed steadily now, a low lullaby against the quiet. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt that faint weight around my waist again. Imagined or remembered, it didn't matter. It was there. And somewhere in the next room, I wondered if he was awake too, thinking about the same thing, pretending it was nothing, trying to believe it. The days after that night were all about pretending. Mark went to work earlier than usual, boots thudding across the hallway before dawn. The coffee pot gurgled, the door slammed, and then silence would take the apartment hostage again. I'd wake up to the smell of burnt toast and absence. He came home late too, later than the job required. I told myself he was just busy, that there were projects, deadlines, overtime. I told myself a lot of things because the truth, that maybe he was avoiding me, was harder to swallow. We spoke in fragments. Hey, yeah. Need anything from the store? I'm good. The quiet stretched between us like tape, thin and sticky. I convinced myself it was meaningless. People reach for warmth in the dark. It doesn't mean they want you in the light. But then there were moments that betrayed that theory. One morning I passed him in the hallway, close enough to feel the static of proximity. He mumbled something about needing the charger, reached past me, his hand brushing mine. The touch was brief, but electricity doesn't care about duration. We both froze, then stepped away too quickly, both pretending it was nothing. Another night, we ended up on the couch again, watching a rerun neither of us cared about. He laughed at something stupid, and I caught myself staring. The way his eyes softened when he laughed, the way the corner of his mouth curved like a secret. He noticed. His smile faltered for half a second, then came back forced. The tension was a living thing in the room, breathing heavier than both of us. It was Wednesday when it broke. The argument was about dishes, of all things. He came home, dropped his jacket on the chair, saw the sink half full, and sighed. You couldn't at least rinse them? They've been there all day. I've been writing, I said, trying to sound calm. Yeah, I noticed. You write, I clean. Nice system. I felt heat rise to my face. I'll do them now. You don't have to. It's not about the dishes, Evan. His voice cracked halfway through my name. It's about. Forget it. No, say it. He stared at me like I'd asked him to touch fire. Then he shook his head, running a hand through his hair. You know what? Never mind. I'm just tired. Mark. He stopped at the doorway. I didn't know what I planned to say next, but whatever came out wasn't logical. It was loaded, trembling. You've been acting weird since that night. He turned slowly, eyes dark. Weird. You barely talk to me. You leave early, come home late. If something's wrong, just say it. Something snapped then, invisible but loud. Why do you always look at me like that? He blurted. The question hit harder than shouting would have. I blinked. Like what? Like you're waiting for something. Like I'm supposed to say or do something I can't even name. The words hung in the air, sharp and echoing. I could have denied it. I could have laughed, said he was imagining things. But I was tired of pretending too. So I said quietly, because I don't know how not to. Silence. Heavy, deafening. His jaw tightened. Don't, he whispered. Don't do that. Do what? Make it sound real. It is real. He exhaled sharply, grabbed his keys and left. The door shut harder than it needed to. The sound of it shook something loose in me. For the next few days, the apartment felt like a crime scene. Everything was in its place, but nothing felt alive. His mug still sat beside the sink. His jacket still hung on the chair. His laugh still echoed in corners that refused to forget. I tried to work, but every word came out wrong. Tried to sleep, but dreams kept looping back to the warmth of his arm, the way his voice cracked when he said don't. The quiet was worse now. Before, it had been comfortable, something we shared. Now it was punishment. On the third night, I decided I couldn't stay. I packed slowly, folding shirts that still smelled faintly like detergent and regret. Each zipper sounded final. I told myself it was practical. He needed space, I needed peace. The box labeled books sat open on the floor when I noticed the note. It was on my pillow, written in his uneven handwriting. Don't go. Please. No explanation. No signature. Just that. I stared at it for a long time, heart pounding so hard it felt like noise. I sat down, holding the note like it was something alive, something fragile that might vanish if I breathed too hard. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every version of him, the joking one, the quiet one, the man in the dark who said we can share the blanket. Maybe the truth wasn't that complicated. Maybe we were both scared of the same thing, just in different languages. The distance between us wasn't made of anger. It was fear, the kind that sits between want and shame. The next morning, I heard the front door open softly. Footsteps paused in the hallway. Evan. His voice was uncertain, as if he expected me to be gone already. I'm here, I said. He stepped into the room, eyes landing on the half-packed boxes. His jaw flexed. You were serious. I thought you wanted space. He shook his head slowly. That's not what I want. What do you want, Mark? I asked. My voice cracked on his name. He didn't answer right away. Just looked down, hands clenched at his sides. Then he said quietly, I don't know yet, but not this. Not you leaving. Something in me gave way. Not relief, not victory, just exhaustion wrapped in hope. I sat on the edge of the bed. Then stopped pretending nothing happened. He took a step forward, then another, until the air between us felt charged again. Like the moment before lightning strikes. I don't know how to explain it, he said. You confuse me. You make everything I thought I knew feel wrong, or maybe just different. That's not confusion, I said softly. That's honesty. He exhaled, shaking his head. Maybe, but I'm not ready. I'm not asking you to be. The words hung there, fragile and trembling. He sat beside me, careful not to touch. For a long time, we just breathed in the same silence. Neither of us sure what would come next. The heater clicked on again, breaking the stillness. The sound felt like forgiveness trying to start. He looked at the note still in my hand. I meant it, he said. I know. For the first time in days, his shoulders dropped, the tension easing slightly. We didn't fix anything that night. We didn't need to. Something cracked open instead, the space where pretense had lived. And in that broken space, there was room for something else. Not quite love yet, not safety either, but something that could become both if we stopped running. Later, when he finally went to his room, I sat there for a long time staring at the half-packed box. The note lay on top, edges curling slightly, words still whispering in my mind. Don't go, please. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a confession. It was a beginning made out of surrender. I unpacked my clothes slowly, folded each one again, and put it back into the drawer. The apartment was still quiet, but this time, the quiet didn't hurt. It was waiting for truth, for courage, for us. The note changed everything, but not all at once. We existed in a truce made of silence. The kind of quiet that isn't cold anymore, just waiting for someone to fill it. Mark still came home late, but he no longer slipped past me like a ghost. He'd pause at the doorway, eyes searching for something he didn't name. I'd nod, pretending to focus on my laptop while his presence rearranged the air. It felt like standing on the edge of a confession neither of us had the courage to make. Days turned into nights, and nights turned into the kind of loneliness that has someone else's name on it. It was a Thursday when it finally broke. The power had gone out again, courtesy of a storm that rattled the windows like it wanted in. I was in bed, half reading, half listening to the rain, when I heard the softest knock on my door. Yeah, I said, sitting up. The door opened an inch, then another. Mark stood there barefoot, in a hoodie that hung off him like surrender. His eyes were tired, voice low. I've been trying to figure out what's wrong with me. The sentence landed heavy. I set the book aside. You want to come in? He hesitated, then nodded, stepping into the dim room. The power outage turned everything soft. Candlelight from the hall flickered against his face, shadow and glow fighting for space. He sat at the edge of the bed, hands clasped, head bowed. I keep thinking I'll make sense of this if I just stay busy, keep moving. But every time I slow down, it's you. I swallowed. Me? He looked up. You're everywhere. The smell of your coffee, the sound of your typing, the way you laugh when you're trying not to. It's like my brain built a room for you, and I can't close the door. His voice cracked on the last word. I didn't move. Mark. He shook his head. I'm not saying this right. I've never felt this before. I keep thinking it's wrong. But when I try to stay away, it feels worse. He exhaled shakily. You make me feel safe, but also like I'm losing control. Like I don't know who I am when you're near. The room tilted a little, or maybe it was my heartbeat. Then stop trying to define it, I whispered. You don't have to label it. Just be honest. He looked at me for a long time, as if honesty was the one thing he'd been avoiding all his life. I'm scared, he said finally. Of what? That if I touch this, if I touch you, I won't be able to pretend anymore. I took a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Then don't pretend. The silence that followed was a living thing, pulsing, waiting. He reached up slowly, like testing the weight of gravity. His fingers brushed my cheek. Hesitant, trembling, warm. I felt everything at once. Fear, relief, longing, all tangled in the space between breaths. I don't know what this means, he said softly. Neither do I. He smiled then, a small, broken thing. Good. I was hoping we could be lost together. The moment stretched, fragile as glass. His thumb traced the edge of my jaw. My breath hitched. The room was silent except for the storm outside, rain whispering against the glass. And then, gently, almost uncertain, he leaned forward. The first touch wasn't a kiss, not yet. It was the ghost of one, the press of warmth that asked for permission and gave it at the same time. When it finally happened, it was barely a kiss at all, soft, trembling, real. No fireworks, no rush, just release. The kind of touch that says, I've been holding this in too long. His hand moved to the back of my neck, mine to his shoulder. Neither of us deepened it. We just stayed there, breathing, like the world had stopped moving long enough to let us exist. When we pulled apart, he rested his forehead against mine. His voice came out small. I didn't mean for this to happen. I know, I said. Neither did I. We sat there, close enough to feel each other's heartbeats. I could smell the rain on him, the faint trace of fear and honesty mixed together. He laughed quietly. The sound cracked open something tender. I'm terrible at this. At what? At admitting things. I smiled. You're doing fine. We talked until the candles melted low, the storm outside softening into steady rain. The world shrank to the room, the bed, and the fragile thread of truth stretched between us. He told me things he'd never said before, how he hated being alone, how his father's voice still haunted him when he tried to rest, how he'd learned to be calm because anger scared him. I thought I knew myself, he said, eyes unfocused. But this you, it's like meeting a stranger wearing my skin. I don't want to change you, I said. I just want you to stop fighting yourself. He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw something in his eyes that wasn't fear anymore. It was recognition. Maybe it's not about being straight or not, he whispered. Maybe it's just about you. Something inside me broke open. A quiet sob that wasn't sadness, just too much emotion packed into a single heartbeat. He reached for my hand. Our fingers fit awkwardly at first, then perfectly. We lay there for hours, fully clothed, fully awake. The bed was small, the silence large. He talked about the confusion, the guilt, the comfort. I told him about the loneliness, the waiting, the fear of misreading everything. Sometimes we didn't talk at all, just listened to the rain. Every now and then, he'd whisper something like, "This feels right," or, "I didn't think I could." At one point he asked, "What happens now?" I thought about it, then said, "Nothing has to happen. We can just be here." He nodded. "Here's good." His thumb brushed over my knuckles, absent-minded and gentle. I leaned against him, the steady rhythm of his breathing grounding me. For the first time since moving into this apartment, I wasn't cold. The storm eventually passed, leaving behind the quiet hum of the city at dawn. A faint light seeped through the blinds, painting everything gray-blue. Neither of us moved. He whispered, half asleep, "I feel like I can breathe again." "Then don't stop," I said. He smiled without opening his eyes. "You're dangerous, you know that?" "How so?" "You make it too easy to be honest." When the power flickered back on, the light startled both of us. He groaned, burying his face in the pillow. "Morning's rude," he mumbled. I laughed softly. "It's also real." He lifted his head, eyes sleepy but clear. "Yeah," he said, voice rough. "So is this." He squeezed my hand once before letting go. There was no grand promise, no dramatic declaration. Just a truth that had been waiting in the dark too long. And now, finally, it had light. Weeks passed, and the apartment learned to breathe again. The air that once felt heavy now carried the soft rhythm of normal life. The clink of mugs in the morning, the faint hum of the heater finally doing its job, the kind of silence that no longer asked for explanation. Mark and I never had the talk. There were no labels, no ultimatums, no sweeping declarations. Just small acts that quietly filled the space where uncertainty used to live. He'd pour my coffee before I woke. I'd leave my charger by his nightstand because he always forgot his. He'd steal my hoodie on cold mornings, claiming it smelled better than his. I'd roll my eyes but secretly liked the sight of him in it. We existed in a rhythm that didn't need words. Some mornings we cooked together, him at the stove, me chopping vegetables, music humming softly from his phone. He wasn't graceful in the kitchen. Eggs burned more often than they didn't, and once he tried to flip pancakes with a spatula that still had butter from the night before. "You're a disaster," I told him, laughing. He grinned, flipping a half-burnt pancake onto my plate. "You say that now, but you'll eat it anyway." He was right. I did. There was something deeply human about those mornings. The sunlight filtering through curtains, the smell of coffee, his laugh filling the corners that used to echo. The old awkwardness was gone. What stayed was quieter, simpler. The kind of closeness that doesn't announce itself. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me when he thought I wasn't looking, while I wrote or when I was lost in thought. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes always softened. One evening, after dinner, I asked him, "Do you ever miss who you were before all this?" He leaned back in his chair, considering. Sometimes. It was easier. Less complicated. Then he looked at me and added, "But easier isn't the same as better." That stayed with me. We didn't tell anyone. Not because we were ashamed, but because it wasn't anyone else's to understand. At work, he was still Mark, easygoing and straight-talking. To his friends, I was the roommate who somehow puts up with him. To me, he was something in between, the man who burned eggs but remembered how I liked my tea, who didn't need a definition to know what he felt. It wasn't about secrecy. It was about peace. Sometimes, when the city outside buzzed too loud, we'd sit by the window, knees touching, watching the lights blur in the rain. The world could label itself to death. Inside that apartment, we didn't have to. One night, after a long day, I couldn't sleep. The moonlight painted stripes across the floor, and my thoughts wouldn't quiet down. I wandered into the living room. Mark was there, sitting on the couch in sweatpants and a t-shirt, reading a book under the dim yellow lamp. His hair was messy and his glasses, I hadn't even known he owned a pair, sat low on his nose. He looked up when he heard me. "Can't sleep." I shook my head. "You?" He lifted the book, trying to vicariously. I smiled faintly, standing in the doorway. He looked at me for a moment, then patted the couch beside him. When I sat down, the cushion dipped, our knees brushing. The air between us was easy, no tension, no hesitation. He adjusted the blanket around his legs, then glanced at me with that small, familiar grin. "Hey," he said softly, lifting one side of the blanket. "We can share." The same words, the same tone, but this time no hesitation. I laughed quietly. "Deja vu." "Yeah," he said, his voice warm. "But it feels different now." We sat close under the blanket, the same way we had that first winter night, except now I wasn't afraid to breathe. Our shoulders touched. His arm rested lightly behind me. The book stayed forgotten on the table. The heater hummed softly, but I didn't need it. The warmth between us was enough. For a while, neither of us spoke. The city outside went quiet, the world folding into stillness. He turned to me, eyes catching the lamplight. "You know, I used to think this kind of peace was impossible. Like people like me didn't get to have it. And now?" I asked. He smiled, small, honest. "Now, I think it was just waiting for the right person to show up." Something in my chest loosened. I didn't reply with words. I didn't need to. I leaned slightly into him, felt his arm shift until it wrapped around me. It wasn't possessive, just steady, grounding, home. Time seemed to slow down. His heartbeat under my ear was steady, the kind of rhythm you could fall asleep to. The faint smell of his skin mixed with detergent and warmth. Outside, snow began to fall, soft, soundless flakes brushing the window. "Hey, Evan," he murmured. "Yeah." He hesitated. "Thanks for staying." I smiled against his shoulder. "You asked me not to go, remember?" "Still," he said, "you could have left." I looked up at him. "So could you." His eyes softened, the way they always did when truth crept in unexpectedly. "Guess neither of us wanted to." He kissed the top of my head. A quiet, fleeting touch, but it carried the weight of every word we hadn't said. Later, when he dozed off against me, I stayed awake a little longer, memorizing the sound of the heater, the pattern of his breathing, the feel of the blanket draped over us both. I thought about how it started. A rental listing, a broken heater, a blanket shared out of pity, and how it ended, a home built out of warmth and truth. It wasn't a love story, not in the way people write them. There were no grand gestures, no fireworks, no audience. Just two people learning how to stop pretending. Sometimes that's enough. Maybe that's everything. I looked around the living room, the half-empty mugs, the crooked picture frame, the faint glow of the streetlight painting silver over his face. He looked peaceful, his hand still loosely holding mine beneath the blanket. For the first time in a long time, I realized I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for a sign, not for permission, not for a name to give what this was. It just was. It started as a place to stay, a temporary solution to a life falling apart. But under that shared blanket, I found something I didn't even know I was looking for. A home made of warmth and truth. And maybe love doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it comes quietly, barefoot, half asleep, holding a blanket, whispering, "We can share." If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more heartfelt stories like this one. Tell me in the comments, do you think Mark and Evan's connection was love from the start, or something they slowly built over time? Your thoughts mean a lot.